Margaret had always believed that kindness was its own reward. At 62, she'd seen enough of life to know that small gestures often carried the greatest weight. That Tuesday evening in November, as she stood in the long line at Chicago's Union Station, she had no idea how profoundly this simple truth would reveal itself. The station buzzed with the familiar energy of evening commuters. Margaret clutched her ticket for the 7:15 train to Springfield, where her sister waited with homemade apple pie and stories about the grandchildren. It had been 3 months since Margaret's retirement from teaching, and these weekly visits had become a cherished ritual bridge between her old life and whatever came next. Behind her in line, she noticed a young father struggling with a restless toddler. The little boy, perhaps 3 years old, tugged at his father's coat while whimpering softly. The man's shoulders sagged with exhaustion, and Margaret could see the weight of a long day etched in the lines around his eyes. Daddy. I'm tired, the child whispered, his small voice carrying that particular weariness that only comes after a day of too much stimulation and too little rest. I know, Body, the father replied gently, adjusting the child's position in his arms. We'll be home soon, Margaret watched as the man shifted the boy from one hip to the other, his movements careful despite his obvious fatigue. There was something tender in the way he smoothed his son's hair, something that reminded her of her own children when they were small, that protective instinct that never quite fades, even when your own energy is nearly spent. The line moved slowly. Margaret could see the departure board flickering with updates, and she noticed the father checking his phone repeatedly. The 7:15 train was the last direct service to Springfield that evening. If someone missed it, they'd face a long night of connections and delays, as they shuffled forward. Margaret overheard fragments of the man's quiet phone conversation. The meeting ran late. I know. I'm sorry. Yes, we should make the train. Tommy's been such a good boy today. The child had grown heavier in his father's arms, his eyelids drooping despite his efforts to stay awake. Margaret remembered those days with her own children, the way time seemed to stretch endlessly when you were carrying a tired little one, how every minute felt like an hour when you were running on empty yourself. When they finally reached the ticket counter, Margaret heard the conversation she'd been dreading. I'm sorry, sir, the clerk said with genuine regret. That was the last ticket for the 7:15. The next train to Springfield isn't until tomorrow morning at 6:30. The father's face fell. Are you sure, my son? We really need to get home tonight. Margaret felt her heart tighten. She looked at the little boy, now dozing against his father's shoulder, and thought about her sister's warm kitchen, the cup of tea that would be waiting, the comfortable bed in the guest room. Then she thought about this father and son, facing a night in the station or an expensive hotel room, all because of a meeting that had run too long. Before she could second-guess herself, Margaret stepped forward. Excuse me, she said softly, touching the clerk's arm. I'd like to give my ticket to this gentleman. The father turned, surprise and confusion flickering across his tired features. Oh no, I couldn't. Please, Margaret said, meeting his eyes with a gentle smile. I'm in no hurry, my sister. We'll understand. Your little one needs to get home. The man's eyes glistened. That's incredibly kind, but I can't accept nonsense, Margaret said, already pushing her ticket across the counter. I have nowhere I need to be tonight, but this little fellow needs his own bed. As if on cue, the child stirred and looked up at Margaret with sleepy eyes. She smiled at him, and he managed a small wave before tucking his face back into his father's neck. I don't know what to say, the man said, his voice thick with emotion. You're an angel. Margaret chuckled softly. Just a retired teacher who remembers what it's like to have a tired child. Go on, catch your train. The man reached for his wallet, but Margaret shook her head firmly. No payment necessary. Just, maybe someday, when you see someone else who needs a small kindness, you'll remember this moment. He nodded, understanding passing between them. David, he said, extending his hand. David Chen, and this is Tommy. Margaret Sullivan, replied, shaking his hand warmly. It's lovely to meet you both. Asterisk, as David hurried toward the platform with Tommy in his arms, Margaret felt a familiar warmth spreading through her chest. It was the same feeling she'd experienced countless times in her classroom. When a struggling student finally grasped a difficult concept, or when she'd helped a shy child find their voice, asterisk, she called her sister from the station cafe, explaining the situation over the gentle clink of evening coffee cups. Asterisk, "Oh, Margaret," her sister said with a knowing laugh, "you haven't changed a bit. Come tomorrow instead. The pie will keep, and the stories will be even better." Asterisk, 3 weeks later, an envelope arrived at Margaret's apartment. Inside was a handwritten note on elegant letterhead, along with a photograph of Tommy playing in what looked like a beautifully appointed family room. Asterisk, "Dear Margaret." The note read, "I wanted you to know that your kindness that evening meant more than you could possibly imagine. Tommy and I made it home safely, and he's been telling everyone about the nice lady at the train station who helped us. I hope you won't mind, but I've made a donation to the Springfield Children's Library in your name. When I researched your address to write this note, I learned about your 40 years of teaching. It seemed fitting that your kindness should continue to help children learn and grow. Asterisk, with endless gratitude, David Chen, CEO. Chen Industries. Asterisk, Margaret smiled as she read. The note then looked at Tommy's photograph. The title and company name meant nothing to her. What mattered was the memory of a tired father and sleepy child who'd needed a small act of kindness. Asterisk, she pinned the photo to her refrigerator, right next to a drawing from one of her former students. Both reminded her of the same simple truth. Kindness has a way of rippling outward, touching lives in ways we may never fully understand. Asterisk, that evening, Margaret called her sister. Asterisk, I have a story for you, she said, settling into her favorite chair with a cup of tea. About the night I gave up my train ticket. Asterisk, and as she began to tell the tale, Margaret realized that sometimes the best journeys are the ones we take when we choose to let someone else reach their destination first.